Welcome to the Intentional Guy Podcast, where we are driven to help men become more intentional and purposeful in their daily lives. Your host, Michael Chestnut, will interview amazing guests to get insight and glean wisdom from, so we can integrate intentional living and lead happier, healthier, and more fulfilling lives. All right, let's get started with the show.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Intentional Guy. I'm Michael Chestnut, your host, and I am here today with a special guest, Amanda Blackwood. Amanda, thank you for being on our show. And we're going to hit a topic that I've not done on here before, but so needed. And I think a lot of people shy away from it too, because if we don't talk about it, it doesn't exist, right? So I think that's the theory with it. But part of my story was addiction to pornography. And what I did not realize in the midst of that was the victims that were being used for that, and I had to go through my own journey, but during my recovery, Amanda, I learned more about that. And God revealed to me, that my sin affected not just me, but a lot of people, not just my family that I lost and things that happened. It was a traumatic event in my life. But the pornography industry today and everything has created probably even a bigger, whatever you want to call it, for sex trafficking. And I was telling you, I live in the Panhandle where it's very prevalent and all that. So today is, a subject I want us to talk about. And I would love for you to share our story, start us off on this conversation today, and help us learn a little bit about the subject, because a lot of people don't know and don't understand how real and prevalent it is in our neighborhoods.
Right. And it really is everywhere. So one of the first things that I like to do is to explain what human trafficking is.
Okay.
Now, according to the Department of Homeland Security, human trafficking is defined as the use of force, fraud, or coercion to obtain labor or sex acts from another person. Now, if you notice, there's no mention of moving a person from one place to another, no transportation. That is considered human smuggling. And there's no mention of money exchanged. And that means that human trafficking does not equal prostitution, and prostitution does not equal human trafficking. There are massive amounts of overlap in all of these areas, but they are all separate issues that need to be addressed. And people need to understand that just because they didn't get transferred from one location to another, or they're not being forced into prostitution, does not mean that they haven't been trafficked.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. If you would tell us, to be honest, I don't even know where to begin with this. So I would love for you to just start us off, tell us your story, and give us some of the information and the details behind this.
So with most victims of human trafficking, we experience some form of early childhood abuse and trauma. I was no stranger to that myself. The first time that I remember being molested, I was 4. It happened again when I was 12, 13, 15, 16. I was raped at 17 by the person that I thought was my best friend that I'd known since I was 12. The first time I was trafficked, I was actually 18 years old. So we have this preconceived notion here in the U.S. that trafficking only happens to people under the age of 18. Save the children is the popular hashtag, right?
Right.
That's only 1/4 of all victims worldwide. So if there's only 1/4 of these millions of victims that are under the age of 18, that means the majority of them are people that are over the age of 18 who have zero resources once they do manage to finally get out. All the resources are being reserved for kids. So when you're 18 years old and you're being trafficked and you're still fairly naive and young and you have no idea what's going on or why you're going through this, you don't know what options are available to be able to help you to get out of this situation or to be able to progress from it. That's the situation I found myself in at 18 years old, where I was dating a man that was more than twice my age, who loaned me out basically for a birthday weekend to his best friend.
Mm.
I was taken to Las Vegas, Nevada, and locked into a hotel room and told if I leave, I'm not welcome back. I had all of my identification. I had no money. I had no family or resources to depend on. And for 52 hours, I had to put up with repeated assaults
Wow.
to be able to get back to where I had been living so I could get my identification back and get all of my few belongings, get out. And I did end up homeless for a while. I found my way from Arizona down to Florida, where at 19 years old, I was going to get a knee surgery done. I had injured myself on the job. My plan was to stay with my dad's mother. When I got to the Daytona Beach bus station at 10:30 at night and I called her to come and pick me up, her husband, my dad's stepdad, answered instead. And what he said blew my mind, that they were not coming to get me and I was on my own, good luck. And he hung up.
Mm.
I had $5 to my name. I had, again, no family other than them that I was aware of. I didn't have their address. So I couldn't just show up on their doorstep. I had nothing except a single suitcase.
Wow.
And a young couple told me, well, we have a place. We can see you're in distress. We'll give you a place to stay until you can get yourself back on your feet. And what they really meant was they were going to give me a place to stay until they could find the highest bidder.
Mm.
So they sold me to somebody. I was locked up for 23 and a half hours in a small room with no food, no water, no bathroom facilities. And I was very lucky that during the 1980s and 1990s, there was this fabulous TV show on called MacGyver. A man could fix anything with a paperclip and a rubber band, right?
Yep. And masking tape. Yep.
Yeah. I used to have a T-shirt that said, "What would MacGyver do?"
Mm-hmm.
Because of what happened to me in Florida that day. I managed to slow myself down, stop, calm myself enough to think rationally, okay, what would MacGyver do? And I MacGyvered my way out of that room. I won't go into too many details. I did write a book about that one. And it stuck with me for a long time. There were other people in that building, and I didn't go back for them.
Oh, wow.
And I had this massive amount of survivor's guilt.
Right.
So once I did get out, I floated around again and kept on trying to run away from my problems and not dealing with all of this trauma because it just kept on building up. I didn't have time to slow down and take care of all the trauma. I only had time to slow down and take care of one problem at a time. And trauma is about 5 million things at one time.
Right. Exactly.
So I made my way out to California, and my ambition out there was to become a really successful assistant to somebody important. And the reason for that was because I had confused hypervigilance, which is a trauma response, with empathy. I thought that I was really good at reading people and I could predict their needs and wants and desires enough to know when a boss was going to need a cup of coffee or what paperwork needed to be signed. I don't know if you ever watched MASH, but I fancied myself like radar. I could just hone in and know what people needed in advance. That was my goal. Instead, I was on Alias and Will and Grace, and I modeled for Harley Davidson, and I did lots of really cool stuff in LA. Lots of really amazing things. But I also got involved in internet dating. So at this point, I've already been trafficked twice. I didn't realize it was called trafficking because trafficking to me is a kid being kidnapped by a total stranger in a windowless van, when that makes up less than 15% of all victims of human trafficking. Kidnapping scenarios are incredibly rare. It's usually people with a sense of authority over the victim's life. Like in my case, the boyfriends or the nice young couple who took me in.
Right.
So through the world of internet dating, I met this man who lived out of the country. So we decided we were going to be pen pals because we got along really well. but he lived all the way over in Scotland. So obviously that was all it was ever going to be.
Right.
But within the next 7 years that go by, I went to go and visit him, and he came to visit me, and we decided that we were in love, and I was going to move to Scotland to go and be with him. And when he finally asked me to get a fiancé visa, I had left the Hollywood scene and the acting stuff behind, and I had become a director of public safety and security for 6 different properties in LA County. I had just gotten an $11,000 a year raise. I had just secured raises for every single one of my employees. I had revamped how the company did scheduling, and I had done all of this stuff as a first-time director with basically nothing but a GED and no college education. I was changing things. I had worked so hard, and I gave up my career and my car and my apartment to move to Scotland to go and be with this man that I had known for 7 years and who had seen all of this growth. And I was excited. I was moving to the land of kings and queens and castles. It took him 7 years to get me there, and it took him 7 days to start trafficking me.
Wow. And you never had any clue to that?
None at all. He was really good at being manipulative from a distance, because even when we were in person, it was limited amounts. It was micro doses of who we really were. It's so much easier to pretend that you're somebody else entirely when you don't have to be around them all the time. Yeah. He pulled the wool over my eyes so sufficiently, because all we had when we were long distance was Skype. He would eat dinner as I was eating breakfast. We would have our meals together, and we would have these fabulous conversations, and that's what our lives were. But then the computers went away, and we went about our day, and both of us were different people. Wow. I pulled the wool over his eyes too. I was still perfectly innocent in his eyes, when really I was still extremely damaged and scared of everything.
But imagine how patient. So the predators, to me, how patient they are. Like he was patiently waited 7 years.
Yeah.
Where people would think, oh, no one would do, you've been with them, you've talked to them for 7 years. This is safe. Everything's okay.
Right.
But the mindset of the predator is totally different. We can't expect them to think the way that, if you want to say normal, I don't know if there's anybody normal, but how normal society would think. And so, just the patience right there to do that and to be that manipulative is amazing to me. So
yeah, absolutely.
How did you find your way out of that?
I made multiple attempts to get out pretty early on. One of them was by conning him into giving me back my passport and my debit card and my ID card and all of that stuff one night while he was very, very drunk in the middle of abuse. And I told him that I needed this stuff back so I could go to the bank and pull all of my money out so I could give him the money so we could spend it. So otherwise it was just going to sit there forever and not do us any good. In reality, I tried to find the first flight out that I could afford. I only had about $2,000 in my bank, and that flight that I could afford wasn't going to happen for at least 5 days. So I had to put up with this continued abuse for another 5 days to be able to catch the flight. But right before that flight, some of the people that came over abused me so severely that my kidneys started shutting down, and I found myself in the hospital when the flight took off. And it was a non-refundable ticket. So obviously I wasn't going to buy my way out.
Right.
One of the other ways that I tried to take out was suicide.
Mm-hmm.
And the suicide rates among victims of human trafficking is incredibly high. Less than 2% of all victims of trafficking actually survive. They die in some way, usually within 7 years.
So less than 2% survive?
Yes, less than 2% survive.
Wow. That's a startling number to me.
Yeah.
So I'm dad and I'm a poppy. And I guess I don't fully understand trafficking too, because what you said at the beginning when you defined trafficking. So, what is the most common way today that someone is trafficked? Because my daughter's older, she's not a child, and so my wife worries about her all the time when she goes somewhere, does something alone, and I'm like, she's a grown woman, she's fine, she's not. So I didn't realize about the majority. So now I'm in panic mode a little bit, but what are some things to look out for, or what are some of the common things that we're seeing that can open our eyes a little bit to this?
Well, one of the things we need to do is really understand what trafficking looks like. And on the surface, typically what you're seeing is signs of domestic violence. It's very, very similar. So most people that are trafficked by people they know and trust and love and who have a sense of authority in their lives, like parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, boyfriends and girlfriends. In my case, the first one was the boyfriend. The last one was the fiance. They have this sense of authority over life, and they use tactics of manipulation, much like you would in domestic violence. You threaten them, you strike them, you gaslight them, you tell them, if you love me, you'll do this for me. And it can start with something very small, like taking one more shot when you're at the bar. If you love me, you'll do this for me. And eventually these manipulations grow. Now, it doesn't have to be a physical violence to be able to force somebody into doing something. It can be something as simple as a threat of violence. I've known other victims of trafficking who have had their siblings' lives threatened. And I've known people who have had their family dogs killed in front of them to show them what's possible and what would happen to them if they don't do what they're being told to do. So these early warning signs of manipulation can absolutely escalate into something violent and brutal. The last time I was trafficked, you remember I dated this guy through internet dating for 7 years. I was 31 years old. In recent years, the youngest person to be rescued from human trafficking here in the state of Colorado was less than a year old. And the oldest, she was in her 70s.
Wow.
You're never too young or too old to end up being victimized by a predator who has ill intentions.
Well, the alarming part is you're saying it's someone that that could be a parent, could be a relative, it could be a close family friend, it could be any of this.
Right.
And the violence that is associated with it, with just 2% survival rate, is alarming.
Many die of forced starvation. I am a survivor of sport torture myself. Starvation, sleep deprivation, waterboarding, some pretty bizarre forms of torture. But
so basically, when we're talking about sexual traffic, we're talking about more than just that. We're talking about
severe
sounds like
abuse.
more like serial killers and things.
It sounds like it. Yeah. It
know,
does sound like it, but when the suicide rates are that high, it can't be a serial killer because the serial killer would have to have a direct hand in the death.
No,
So
that's a bad definition.
Many die of drug overdoses, alcohol poisoning, those kinds of things too.
So they're covered up because, like you said, it's someone they know, someone that supposedly they're in a relationship with, or what have you.
Right.
So you have a loved one. So this is something that we need to watch out with even our own kids, and go off to college, you get a boyfriend, get a girlfriend, whatever, and can easily be, we think is domestic violence, or we think is just adolescent behavior or whatever, can be way more than what we think it is.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. People need to start to understand and learn about healthy boundaries and self-esteem. These are two of the biggest ways to be able to fight back against being stuck in one of these manipulative behavior relationships that can absolutely force you down the dark road of domestic violence or human trafficking.
But how do you help someone? You said some people are being trafficked and don't know it.
Right.
How,
I
how is
didn't
that?
know it.
So how is
So,
that? And then how do we, if we see the signs for that, how do we help them?
probably the best way that we can help them is to ask them, what can I do to help? Yeah. I remember in the middle of my trafficking, there was one day that when I tried to take myself out, when I tried to commit suicide, I went to the train station and I was waiting for somebody, basically anybody, to ask me what's wrong. And nobody did. I was crying. I looked very upset. It was obvious that I needed help, and nobody stepped in because nobody cared. Everybody kept on thinking to themselves, it's not my problem.
Right.
Whatever is going on with this person over here is not my problem. We need to make it our problem.
Yes.
We need to step in and intervene. There's a reason that God put us on this planet to watch out for each other. We need to actually step up and start doing it.
Yeah. Well, and I think people have an idea that trafficking is more prostitution
Right.
and everything else, and not realizing that it can be unhealthy. I don't want to discredit it in any way, shape, or form, but unhealthy relationships, and we don't know what happens behind closed doors. And, here are people who can have secret lives, like not having a clue about the man in Scotland. You get over there, and then maybe to everyone around him, life looks normal, looks like a healthy relationship,
There still would have been keys that they could have watched for them.
if they
For
wanted to.
instance, when he would get home from work in the evenings, because he did have a normal job, he was a police officer.
Wow.
When he would get home in the evenings, there were different people coming over pretty much every night. And they would come over at specific hours. When you start seeing patterns like this at your neighbor's house, where there's a different person every night and it's never the same person, that's not his best friend that's coming over to hang out and have burgers and watch TV. There's something going on. There's something wrong. You can mistake this for being drug deals when you're in a bad part of town, but when you're living in a nice part of town and that's a police officer's home, what are you going to mistake it for?
Oh, yeah.
It could be anything. It could be other police officers coming by to check on a report, or it could be somebody coming over to watch a show. But at the same time, you have to ask yourself, why is it different people every night? Why are these people dressed like this? Because there are signs with the way that they're dressing too. I don't want to sound like there's this rape culture that's built on miniskirts, because that's not what I'm talking about. When people are going over to somebody else's house to have sex with somebody, they dress and act and walk in a particular way. They look over their shoulder because they want to know if they're being followed. They don't look inconspicuous like somebody's best friend coming over for a burger. You got to watch for these signs. And this is, again, where a lot of people don't realize that this is trafficking, because there was no exchange of money in so many of these circumstances.
It was, you just chose to be in a bad relationship.
Right. And that's another thing that I battle a lot. Is I've had people ask me 3 times, how did this happen to you 3 times? Didn't you learn anything the first time? And it's really harsh. If we rephrase that, if we rethink that, if we ask that same question to a rape victim, 3 times, you were raped 3 times. Didn't you learn anything the first time? That sounds really awful.
It
We
is.
build these neuro pathways in our brain to make us believe that certain things are normal. We create these trauma reactions that we then reinforce every time we're triggered.
Right.
Our brains start to be drawn to these kinds of people, whether we want to be or not, because this is what's familiar.
Yeah. Well, and I think people don't understand unresolved trauma leads to a life of chaos and confusion and self-loathing and just so many things. And
Pain,
people,
addiction, self-medication.
yeah, and people we don't realize that a majority of people around us, I didn't realize it, that until I wrote my book about it, how many people who I knew said they had experienced similar, you know,
Yes.
and, so unresolved trauma, especially any kind of trauma, but unresolved sexual trauma can manifest in so many different ways. And some of those ways, um, it can put you in abusive relationships. I can see where that could easily happen because you don't feel worthy, you don't feel good enough. Also, you've lived in secret your whole life, never sharing this stuff. And what it does to your inner being is crazy. There was not a day I woke up after what happened to me as a child that I didn't wake up and say, I hate myself.
Yeah.
Until just 3 years ago when I finally sought counseling. I can't think of a day I didn't say it, and I hate myself.
And how much control did you have over the situation when it happened?
None. Zero.
None. Absolutely none. And yet you hated yourself, not the person who put you through it.
Correct. And so I can see where it's that way. And people would probably ask questions like, well, why didn't you leave during the day when, he was gone? Well, there's several reasons. And we've seen those. One, sometimes I know that you can't get out because you're locked up. Two, sometimes you can't because where are you going to go?
Right. Yeah.
And you don't know who's watching you. And there's a fear that the predator also puts inside of you, that there's more people. And how many are watching? How many,
Right.
who could it be the neighbor? And technology we have today too. We have cameras, just so many things. And people think it's just so easy to escape. But when you feel already alone, what do you do?
Right. And I mean, he was a police officer. He was bringing over judges and lawyers and the people that I should have been able to turn to for help.
Mm.
They were additional abusers. And I was occasionally locked into the house. When I did have free reign and was able to walk down to the store, then I had pocket change to spend. He had all of my identification, especially after he found out that I had purchased an emergency flight trying to get out of there. Boy, did I pay for that one.
Yeah.
There was always something. It was a very small town in Scotland. I didn't have any resources available to me. He did take away my computer after I'd purchased that flight. So I couldn't look up to see where there was an American consulate. I couldn't find any resources whatsoever. And not knowing what options are available is the same thing as not having options.
Well, and would the American consulate help you too if you were, by the definition of itself, would they even help is my question.
I doubt it. I was over the age of 18 and I had personally made the decision to move to Scotland to be with this man. They would have more than likely told me that this was a domestic violence situation because at the time I didn't know how to describe what I was going through. And they would have told me that the local authorities would need to solve this issue.
And he was the local authority.
He was the local authorities.
Wow. So, How did you eventually get out of that situation?
I had been so interested in psychology that I wanted to understand why the brain worked the way it did and why certain patterns kept on poking up in my life, why they kept on showing. I had started studying psychology after that first incident of trafficking when I was 18. So I was a high school dropout. I never had any kind of formal education, and people tended to think of me as ignorant because of that, when in reality, I was quite intelligent and just did what I could to try and hide that from people. It was fashionable to be ditzy and stupid. So I got good at pretending. I was an actress. But I studied psychology for all these years. And I knew that him being a police officer, he would understand what it used to be called Stockholm Syndrome. It's now called trauma bonding. I knew that he would know what this was and he would know the effects of it. But I also knew that I was a better actor than he could have ever imagined. And I convinced him that I had trauma bonding so deeply embedded that at the end of my 6-month visa, if we weren't married, I could get kicked out of the UK and never be allowed back because of UK laws. And you could lose your job as a police officer, and we don't want that, do we?
Mm.
But if you send me back to LA, I could be back there for 6 months. I could return in time for Christmas, and it would be our first Christmas together. And wouldn't it be beautiful?
Mm.
And it took me months to be able to work up to that point and to just drop little pieces here and there, like little breadcrumbs.
Right.
And the night that I finally had that conversation with him in June, it was 2 hours later, he had purchased a round-trip flight from me. It took a long time to be able to line up a place to stay before all of this, and I had to do that by purchasing a very nice updated smart TV that had access to social media.
Mm.
And I used that access to social media to be able to log into my own social media and to communicate with people back home to find a place to stay.
Wow.
It didn't stop, though, just because I got out of there. So in 2018, a friend of mine reached out and said, "Hey, there's this anti-trafficking conference coming up. Have you heard about it?" And I said, No, I haven't heard. It was expensive. I didn't have the money to be able to really attend at the time. And my friend immediately, without even asking me, purchased me a ticket and said, "You're going. You need to go to this." I think he knew something that I didn't know. I was convinced that it still only happened to little kids in windowless vans being kidnapped by total strangers. I think this friend of mine knew what it meant and knew enough of my story to know that I needed to go. And when they broke down and defined what human trafficking was, and they talked about these other instances, and they had other speakers on this stage talking about their own life stories, I started to realize that that's what I had been through. And when they opened up the floor to questions, they had a panel of 5 speakers. I had a question. I raised my hand, and my question was going to be, how long does it take for somebody to have gone through this to have a normal life? I needed to know because I was still fighting, trying to figure it out.
Right.
And what came out of my mouth instead was, I'm a survivor and I need help.
Mm.
It was the first time I had ever really asked for help to get through any of the trauma crap that I had been through since I was 4. And then I asked my question, and this panel of speakers was just completely blown away. They didn't know where to start because I had just said that I was a survivor, and they're like, "Oh, what do we do now?"
Right.
But they did answer me, and the answer sticks with me. It's different for every person because every person and every trauma is different, and it affects us differently, and we build different trauma reactions, and we develop different coping mechanisms. And too many people think that they can push a button and have a psychologist fix them with a magic wand. And you have to be willing to do the work in yourself. If you're not willing to do that work, you can stay in that victim mentality and in that hurt place for the rest of your life. You have to be willing to do the work. It was the following year when I found out that that police officer in Scotland had put all these different photos and videos that he had taken of me during the molestations and rapes. And he put them all up on different pornography websites and included my social media information and my personal information for people to be able to find me.
Mm.
And I was recognized in a grocery store.
Wow.
It destroyed me. I immediately reached out to an anti-trafficking organization that I had become familiar with. They paired me up with a legal team that started fighting with the pornography websites to have all this stuff pulled down. And then they got me into counseling and therapy, and I traumatized my first therapist so much that I'm pretty sure the woman left the industry permanently.
Yeah.
But the second therapist I talked to had worked with multiple other human trafficking survivors already. So she knew what she was doing. And I did too. And I told her, I said, look, here's the deal. I need you to be straightforward, pull no punches, don't walk on any eggshells. Tell it like it is. This is the only thing that's going to get me through this. And do not, under any circumstances, hand me a prescription for medication. At the end of our therapy, it was about 1.5 years later, she asked me, I don't think there's much more I can do to help you. You've done really well, and you've moved beyond all of this stuff. We had done EMDR, we had done tapping, we'd done all these different forms of therapy.
Mhm.
I had learned how to be able to move past all this stuff. She said, what are you going to do next? And I said, I think I'm going to write my book. And she said, well, that's fantastic. It's late November now. We'll get through the Christmas season. I'll check back in with you in January, okay? So January came around. She says, hey, how's it going? I said, I'm doing great. She says, no. How's the book going? Oh, it's done. Wait, what? Yeah, it's done. She's like, is it like a short book? No, it's 350 pages. I wrote it all in the month of December. I finally had my opening sentence and I finally had my closing sentence. And I didn't stop writing in between the entire month of December while working 2 full-time jobs. So she asked me, well, what's next? And I said, I don't know at the moment. She said, try painting. I don't know how to paint. Last time I picked up a paintbrush, I was probably in grade school. Finger paints, watercolors. I was terrible always at painting. And she sent over somebody with canvases and paintbrushes and acrylic paints. And within 3 months, I'd sold my first piece. And within 5 months, I had sold stuff everywhere across the United States, including the piece that's hanging up behind me. I eventually used for a book cover. It is hanging in a home for human trafficking survivors in Chicago, Illinois. It's called Carry Your Own Baggage. And it talks about, the little essay that goes with it talks about how we all have to carry our own baggage for such a long, painful time until we finally find a safe place to set it down. My book was released on my 10-year anniversary of freedom from trafficking in June of 2021. And in July of 2021 is when I met the man that's now my husband.
Great. As you're talking, so I know people who are close to me. I know other people through this format here, from letters I've received and stuff like that, that fit what you just described today. Fit it. And some are out of that situation. Some are still in that situation. And I know, the hard part I have for some of the ones who are survivors of it is that they don't even know they're survivors of it.
Right.
And they're seeking no counseling or therapy because, one, who wants to face that? Right?
It's scary.
It is. I mean, it's scary enough because in some instance you realize you're lucky that you are alive, that you weren't killed.
Right. And you think that surviving it is enough.
Right. But what happens is they become paralyzed from their experience to the fact that their decisions they're making and their choices they're making, they're not living in freedom
Right.
still. And what is amazing is God's got way much more for you. But we have to face it to get through. I never wanted to face that I was molested as a child. None of my family members knew about it. And I wrote my book. I was like you. When I sat down to write my book, 3 months later, it was done. Because it just poured. It just poured out. And how many other people, right now, as I'm listening, where can they go? Where can someone go listening? What's the hope you can give someone that right now that we're listening to, who knows they're a victim of it, or they know someone who's a victim of it? Because the truth is that most of the, what would you call them? The sex traffickers themselves are probably rarely caught and
Rarely
prosecuted because you're dealing with adults who made choices to go put themselves in that situation. So the prosecutors and them are not going. I mean, the laws have not caught up with what's being done.
Right.
So how do we help these people?
First, we need to understand what the laws are and lobby to change them. The cost, we'll call it a cost, of somebody to purchase sex from somebody who's being trafficked is about the same as somebody driving over the limit line at a red light. It's $80 to $120, depending on what state you're in. That needs to change. People think that sex work is empowering. It's not. It's degrading and debilitating, and especially in cases of human trafficking. 95% of prostitution is human trafficking. There's a massive overlap, but only about 30% of all human trafficking is prostitution. That means there's a monumental amount of people still being trafficked who think they're not being trafficked because it's not prostitution.
Yeah. Well, some of them, they thought they were getting help. They
Right.
met someone online and thought this person was great. And then they get there and they think they're in domestic violence.
Right. Right. That's exactly it.
Because the lines are so thin.
Yeah. So there's a brand new resource here in the US that's very handy. When you call 911, you typically get fire or police, right? A lot of people who are being trafficked aren't comfortable with calling the police because if you are being turned into a prostitute or have been turned into a prostitute, you can end up being further victimized by legal action.
Yes.
So there's this new program called 988 that you can call instead of 911. 988 will pair you up with a licensed therapist or psychologist, and usually somebody who has lived experience in that field. They can talk to you. They can help you through this. They can pair you up with services that might be able to help. There are many organizations here in the U.S. that are fantastic being able to pair people up with different organizations that are willing to help. Here in Colorado Springs, there's one called Compass 31, this organization is survivor-led. They're amazing. The people who paired me up with legal services, if you just Google Alight Human Trafficking, they pair up survivors of trafficking with legal services pro bono to be able to prosecute against their traffickers, to be able to redefine their identities, to be able to get back whatever it is that they've lost in the world, including their dignity in a lot of cases. There are incredible organizations out there willing and wanting to do the work. We also have to vet them and understand that if there's an organization out there that's becoming very famous and very well known for their work, We have to understand why that is. And in a lot of cases, it's because they're taking the stories of the victims of trafficking and spreading this story over across a wide network of audiences in order to gain more sympathy, so more people throw more money at them. Meanwhile, that victim they took the story from gets nothing and is being further exploited through that.
Wow. So if someone can dial 988, is that anywhere in the United States?
Yes. They're going to be more available in the larger cities. There may occasionally be a little bit of a hold time just because of the circumstances of trying to roll out a program of this size, but they're catching up quickly.
Is it anonymous too?
I believe you can be anonymous.
Because I know some are scared.
Right.
They don't want anyone to know.
Right.
They don't want their family members to know. They don't want anyone to know. And I think that's another reason why probably so many people don't get help, is because the shame that's associated with it.
Right.
You know,
and in a lot of cases, it's your family that's doing the trafficking. Of course, you don't want them to know you're telling on them.
I can't even imagine.
Yeah.
So, you know, I know you have a lot of links and stuff like that that would love to get whatever, put it in here. I would actually, my mind's a little blown away because you've given me information today. I see it through a different lens now, you know, because not educated with all this. So I would love to have you back again, to discuss this a little bit further, because I just got a feeling I'm probably going to, there's certain shows where I get a lot of feedback from, and I'm sure this is probably going to be one of those. And like I said, I already know a couple of people who have reached out to me, and with their just the little bits of what I know fall into the guidelines of what you're saying.
Yeah.
You know, and what's bad is if you're listening to this, is there's hope. You don't have to live in secret. You don't have to, there is freedom, and you can find God is strong enough to rescue us.
Yes.
From our own demons that are in our lives. And no matter what mistakes sometimes we don't want to face the fact that we made the mistake that put us in those situations. Right.
Right.
Well,
and by mistake, it could be just trusting the wrong person.
Yeah. Yeah.
The abuse is never our fault, ever. That's a reflection of the people who do these things, not a reflection of who we are.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Friedrich Nietzsche in the 1800s once said, and it has stuck with us, unfortunately, all these years, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And that is such a lie. The people who abuse us don't deserve the credit for making us stronger. God is the one who makes us stronger.
Well, what scares me so much is how many people are living in this. Yeah. And or have this in their past and don't realize they have a weight behind them. And that if they could cut that string and get some help and talk about it, work through it, they don't. I never realized what happened to me as a child, that trauma would affect my choices the rest of my life. I didn't know that. And this is no different. How people who are sex trafficked, how this is traumatic to you, and how many, we can become someone we don't want to be because we never deal with what has happened to us.
Right.
Trauma
makes us reactive.
Mm-hmm.
Do we really want to live in that state of hypervigilance for the rest of our lives?
Especially when you don't have to. There's freedom. The one thing that I like that I see with you is I see a smile. I see a joy in you that I know had to take a long time to find. you know, and to have a healthy marriage after going through something like that, to be able to write a book and share the story, you know, what strength that is. But what I also know, when you shed light on something in your life, how God can shine on that darkness, how it can remove it.
Absolutely.
You know? And that's the one thing that I want people to know. What's the payoff? Is it going to be painful? Yes. I hate to say it. Ever dealing with trauma is still painful, but the payoff is, in the end, it no longer owns you, and you can be free from it, and you're not a victim of it anymore. You know, you have taken control of your life. You've gotten God involved in it. And now you can be so much better for your family, for your kids, for those that you love, and you can enjoy life again. So that's the important part of it. But Amanda, thank you so much for being here today with it. And like I said, I really hope we can do this again, because my wheels are turning. And like I said, I will see what the response is from this. But thank you so much for sharing your story with us today and talking with us about that. I really appreciate it.
Of course, Michael. Thank you.
And we'll definitely put some links into the description here so that you guys can look at this and let us know what you thought about today's show. Give us some comments, some things about it, because I don't want a show just about feeling good all the time and this and that. We need to talk about the real things, because this subject here, with smartphones and cell phones, the way they are, our kids are bigger targets today than ever before. So we have to deal with this. We have to talk about this, and we have to understand what it is in order to conquer it. So thank you again for being vulnerable and sharing that with us today.
Absolutely.
Until next time, y'all keep being intentional.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Intentional Guy Podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show and got some real value out of it. Tell others what you learned and share the podcast if you think they would benefit from it too. Please follow us on your favorite podcast platform, leave a review, and consider checking out our website, intentionalguy.org, to learn more about us and get in touch. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.